If you were a Tiger driver in 1943, this is the web that made you ask permission, a thinking anti-tank network called the Pakfront. Not Fury geometry. Watch how angles and arguments dawn pours along the steppe like thin milk, hesitant and pale, and the grass receives it without gratitude. Frost hangs in the low places, a lace that will be gone by the hour. But before it loosens its grip, the field completes its preparations. Holes have mouths and names. Range cards are thumb-worn psalms. A birch trunk blackened by lightning has been measured twice for angle and once for metaphor. Guns do not sit as pieces. They sit as a sentence, each clause aware of where the comma must fall when steel approaches. This is not a wall. It is a web taught to think. The men who live inside it know the modest theology of the Pakfront, deny the charge its mirror, turn rank into confusion, ask movement to explain itself until it grows ashamed. You can smell damp rope, powder oil, wool that slept under earth. A captain with the posture of an accountant traces air with a pencil stub, rehearsing fire that will be called not by rank but by geometry. 2 guns to freeze, 3 to finish, 1 to watch and say no to the clever flanker who always arrives too late and too proud. The instruments lie in layers. 45s with faces like small fists. The quick old dogs who bite ankles no one expects. ZIS-2s, needle-nosed and severe, plotting avenues through which nothing armored will pass and remain certain. ZIS-3s, domesticated thunder, their shields sewn with branches, universal as spades, repurposed 85s squinting outward, sky sermons turned to ground law. Farther back, Itsus with the square integrity of barn doors, 76 impatient and honest, 85s gloved in intention, 152s slow as verdicts. Between these musicians, minds lie in braided staves, the color of dirt and negation. A sapper draws white tape into the frost, as if underlining a sentence meant for those who will never see it. The first sound is not an engine, it is the wire breathing. A field phone clicked soft to test fidelity. Then wind gathers the smell of diesel from a far lane, and your ribs begin to count. The black cross shapes arrive with their familiar grammar, Panzer fees like civilized knives, panthers with heretical noses, tigers square-jawed, bringing the authority of nouns. A doctrine of speed and angle hums in their radios. Reconnaissance feels for edges the way a thief feels for hinges. Smoke blooms in planned curtains. This is what the armored mind believes it was born to do, apply tempo until the world concedes. The web declines the invitation. A 57 cracks first, not where the eye hopes, but where the range drum said it would matter. A road wheel bites itself into uselessness, and the confident hull pivots into nowhere. From the cattails at the creek, a 45 coughs twice and removes a track pin with an economy that should be a virtue in scripture. A ZIS-3, which had been breathing through burlap, sheds its disguise and puts a round into the armpit of a hull that believed only in cheeks and chests. Then comes the chorus, not volume, but crossfire, not rage, but angles that were memorized in darkness and written against birch and fence. A formation becomes a series of questions asked of men who thought they had answers. Do not mistake this for ambush alone. The Pakfront is movement taught to sit. Trails bite dirt, spades anchor. Then, at the signal of a lifted hand, the entire field shuffles by meters, a gun backs and swings into the second slit. A reserve walks out from a reed bed and replaces a mouth that must cool. A runner on his belly chews mud and ferries a single correction that saves a crew who had already begun to spend their names. The captain, whose hands smell of pencil and wet leaves, holds 2 volleys when pride begs to shoot, because the rear arc wants the ripe fruit of a tank that thinks itself escaped. You, who have loved the sweep of arrows on maps, are compelled to admire patience with teeth. Pioneers come like punctuation shears for wire, charge for culvert, the small, but stubborn verbs of men who make paths out of obstinacy. A half-track sweeps the hedgerow with a hose of opinion. The hedgerow answers with patience. Minds lift in blossoms of dirt without eloquence. Only timing. The assault guns take their librarian seats. issuing cautions in blunt syllables, until 276, placed cross-grained. Write them into silence with a rhythm that has been practiced in rumor. Smoke is laid, but it does not confuse those who measured yesterday's wind and understood the way drivers steer toward the right-hand fringe. Shots land where exits will be, not where entrances insist. The pack front is not trickery. It is prophecy made from tape and careful eyes. A tiger finally decides to make an ethic of itself and advances through the gray with deliberate spite. The web sighs and becomes artisanal, shrapnel for the infantry that make tigers immortal. Smoke to insult the coax. Then the old truthful labor, 2 bites to the tracks. A low shot where paint is thin and the saints have not been invoked. When the turret lifts exactly the height of a breath, a 76 places a round at the ring with the intimacy of a locksmith. The beast becomes a house. The house admits air. Someone inside says the wrong word, and the house becomes sky. Nemesis is not fury, it is competence that refuses to blink. You stand at the margin and want climax. The field offers economy instead. A Panzer tries range and gets silence, tries closeness and receives a needle, tries flanking and is reminded that flanks are old news. Even decoys make work. A shining shield that burns like theater draws the first angry shot. And 6 strides left the real mouth, quiet and offended, judges the time ripe. The web loves triangles. It loves the humble word wait. It loves to ruin rhythm. When the assault pauses to gather itself, howitzers behind the birches become punctuation periods and commas praising caution and condemning breathlessness. Barrels heat into inaccuracy, and discipline corrects what metal forgets. 57s that loved 800 learn to love 600. Loaders adjust habit like men teaching their hands new hymns. Ammunition becomes ethics capped AP where possible. Naked AP when supplies teach humility. He to lie and then confess. A few tungsten cores spoken about in whispers because bureaucracy disapproves of saints. The tractors that live in the far ditch evolve into sacraments, winches, and curses, making the difference between a gun that remains a noun and a gun that returns as a verb. Nemesis wears grease under the nails. Midday. The assault admits scholarship. Assault guns post oblique. Infantry screen in 2 lines that do not break their own cover. Mete out grenades like punctuation. For a measured hour, the fight is a clinic. Arcs, clipping, arcs. Corrections on time. Smoke where the sun insists. Then accidents accumulate into pattern. A Sturmovik shreds the copse where the observer had been best. A wire is cut by a shell that wanted something else. An Allies 17-pounder appears on a right-hand lane the enemy had misjudged as pastoral. The clinic becomes a ward. The web, which remained modest under flattery, insists on its tempo again. The seam that ate charges at dawn now eats the counterblow it enabled. A company of rifles rides plank-seated T-34s like a rumor made visible, dismounting into the fold with a gallantry you will not see on paper. The tanks do not chase, they push, then hold, then become walls so men can be verbs. An Su-85 leans around a willow and pins a Panzer that was correcting its posture to appear brave. The forward guns swap back to HE to break stubbornness, then return to needlework when stubbornness understands. The field bends, it does not break. A pocket of silence spreads where doctrine once imagined speed. By afternoon, the sky draws out the scent of burnt priming and baked clay. The pack front sheds the day's glamour and does chores. Water arrives and tastes like iron and relief. Bread, white with rail dust, is parceled with the seriousness once reserved for letters. Oil displaces rumor in gearboxes that have begun to speak despair. A dead hull is tugged 3 meters into a better lie, the better to deflect a sightline tomorrow. A decoy shield is tilted to flatter arrogance. Even the scarecrow earns a medal, its hat newly cocked to tempt an optic. You imagine victory. The web imagines tomorrow and refuses to look startled when tomorrow comes. There is nothing cowardly about what the enemy learns. Panthers linger exactly at the range where their philosophy holds, and they hurt what they can see. Pioneers pry at seams with a god's patience and sometimes turn stones into doors. A broom bear tutors a ruin into humility, and allows infantry to say sophisticated things like this way without dying for it. But time is the ground's advocate, and the pack front buys it in quiet armfuls. A minute here, 3 meters there, a formation untidy at exactly the wrong moment. That is how doctrine receives a bruise that will blossom into doubt by night. Dusk takes the field into its mouth and chews softly. Katyusha cords drag combs through the air, making even survivors feel like artifacts. The guns that still have voice give parting gifts, punishing the optimism of retreat. Tractors come with patient snouts and pull iron from shame. Medics sneak cigarettes into palms that will never talk again. A harmonica borrows a tune and returns it improved. The captain collects range cards and tucks them into the pocket where yesterday's live and tomorrow's will go. The steppe exhales the heat of engines. The frost returns to the low places, and the web lowers its head like a cat on a sill outward gaze. Tail twitch. Nothing like sleep. You wanted a single heroic verb. The pack front offers a grammar that forbids lies. Observe, place, mask, hold, strike, withdraw, repeat. The panzers remain brave. Bravery without permission learns new adjectives. Nemesis here is not a curse from myth, but a method that measures the appetite of steel and feeds it stone. When morning comes, engines will clear throats again, and the web will rise a meter left of where it was. If you listen, you will hear patience counting beneath the thunder. Mist lies low and obedient along the drainage ditches, the kind that folds noise and returns it as rumor. Before the birds take custody of the air, the crews complete their quiet catechism, breech faces wiped, traverses tested to the stops, elevation gears kissed with grease that smells of graphite in winter. The white scrawl on range drums is refreshed where dew has tried to turn memory into blur. Horses stamp in the rear where a few pieces still live by leather. Tractors mutter like old men. A Studebaker foreign, reliable, unromantic backs into its queue and becomes another muscle for a plan that eats tonnage as if appetite were doctrine. The pack front wakes as an organ wakes stops drawn. Reeds checked, silence respected. Across the flats, the enemy returns changed, chastened but intent. Assault guns push like punctuation marks, blunt declaratives, while the tanks hover at a scholar's distance. Noses short of the temptation that yesterday punished. Pioneers come early, beads of wire cutters visible at their hips, charges coiled like tame snakes. Infantry step in files that refuse to silhouette against the skyline. Learning the old monastic virtue, the step imposes humility. Navelwerfers speak first, their tainted music rolling down the furrows in phrases meant to unsettle. Behind field guns shave the hedge tops with correct contempt, feeling for the mouse buried one spade down and a prayer deep. The web answers with manners learned under a harsher teacher. No bravado, no hurry. A single 57 sings once too far, and too soon would be sin and bites a road wheel the range card promised. A 76 held on leash by a hand that trusts its own pencil, waits 3 beats and puts an HE a yard short to wrap a track in a sermon of dirt. A 45 opens when the big mouths close for reload, its little shell sneaking under a skirt where paint hides thinness. Then 2 guns fire together, not loud enough to be spectacle, but timed to be arithmetic. You can hear it if you listen, not a fusillade. A proof. Smoke boils where it was planned and curls where it wasn't. The guns were sighted against both possibilities. They address the right-hand fringe because nerves and training steer drivers that way when the world becomes gauze. A Panzer IV presents its shoulder to cover half tracks and finds that shoulders are fashionable, not wise. The shot that denies it comes not from the closest mouth discipline, forbids flattery, but from the one that has kept its breath for exactly this angle. If you crave duel, go write a poem. The field prefers crossfire. The first seam shows where water ran in spring, and men forget to take seasons into account. Pioneers feel it with bayonets, then with wire, then with a small explosive sentence laid exactly under the lip of a culvert. A decoy position produces ash in a chipped enamel cup. 30 meters left. The real piece keeps its doubts under burlap, in patience until the riflemen committed to the dip reveal their shoulders. 2 rounds, both low, both honest, and the seam shrinks from opportunity to inconvenience. The captain smells the change like rain and spends 2 names in Su-76 pair to peck. A platoon of rifles to sand the bright edge back to dull. The light assault guns scoot into view, thin-voiced and brave, and write a short note that says, "Not yet." Mid-morning, the battle grows into a stern conversation between equals. German artillery has learned the trick of arriving together. Shells pinch a forward fold from 3 directions and try to turn earth into logic. Crews lie under trails and recite a chant taught by teachers who never had books. Count 6. Breathe. Count 4. When the lift comes, the gunners do not spring, they slide. Trails biting into second slits rehearsed in moonlight. A loader with hands like a mason's spitz grit shoulders a shell he has already chosen and makes the shot feel personal without ever being sentimental. Assault guns park oblique and begin the librarian's work of erasing footnotes. The web answers in a dialect that uses inches as grammar. One gun levels at a cheek and deliberately misses high, training the enemy to expect vanity. His partner places the real lesson in the lower side where the paint's sheen is the wrong kind of pretty. Pioneers cut, throw, and freeze in the small eternity when an unseen muzzle has counted their heartbeats. A squad dies doing something that history will reduce to a preposition. The steppe writes the names in dirt, the wind edits. A tiger noses out from behind a threshing floor, square-chinned and unembarrassed, and offers a sermon. The Pakfront refuses theology, smoke for the cokes, shrapnel to dismiss the attendants who make tigers immortal. Then the craft 276 to tracks left, then right, with the patience of a carpenter fitting a stubborn door, a 57 to the belly, where geometry is least forgiving, a final, careful curse into the ring when metal lifts to sniff. The beast becomes an address. A man inside says a small word and no more. Nemesis feels cold not because it lacks heart, but because competence has learned to distrust heat. The day ripens into barrel wear and mathematics. 50 WWII shorten their expectations and lengthen their intervals. ZS-3s change fuses with hands that never drop pace. A sapper writes 3 symbols on a fence post with a carpenter's pencil arrow. Cross, circle, and a platoon shifts its world by those crude commandments. Telephone lines, buried one spade, and a hope deep, hum like disciplined veins. In a pit shaded by nettles, a replacement crew studies a range card as if it were scripture, learning the heresies of stumps and swales. Behind, a Comintern tractor drags a dead gun like a reluctant mule, not to boast of salvage, but to reposition a decoy for the evening's lesson. Then the enemy tries something unusually modest and therefore dangerous. Assault guns and Panzer IVs arrange themselves into a hedged, mobile pack front of their own arcs overlapping in an ungainly but sincere geometry. Infantry screens disciplined enough to resist the dance toward heroism. Panthers standing at the precise distance where their long noses feel like prophecy. For half an hour, the field becomes a clinic. Smoke is a chisel, not a curtain. Mortars write commas you can rely on. Corrections arrive on time like the trains of a country that still believes in timetables. You, thirsty for narrative, are offered craft instead. The small errors that history will later call inevitabilities begin to add up. A Sturmovik, late but true, scribbles a diagonal through the copse where an observer's eye had been organizing death. The scribble becomes a gap in sentences. A wire is cut by a shell that wanted something else and gets praise it never asked for. A reserve gunner, too young to know his luck, chooses exactly the right hedge kink to place his sight through. And when he fires, a Panzer correcting for a ditch enters a fate you would call unfair, if fairness ever dated this theater. The clinic becomes a ward. The ward becomes quiet. Now the hinge that has been waiting all morning swings. A company of rifles mounts the waiting T-34s and turns from nouns to a verb that does not shout bind. The tanks do not charge. They draw a C through rye the color of old brass. One flank respecting the geometry the captain tapped onto his palm with a pencil stub. They deliver men exactly into the pocket the enemy made by being correct for too long. The rifles dismount as if poured. A squad's machine gun writes at chest height. A grenade names a room. A sapper lifts wire like a curtain. The forward guns add heat to make dogma soften, then go quiet again because silence is a tool too. The seam closes with the sound of breath found, not of music. Past noon, the heat joins the argument. Powder burns sweeter, oil smells bitterer. A broom bear compels a ruin to agree to history and then learns that history still has flanks. A stewgie, with the manners of an efficient clerk, deletes an overconfident 45 whose courage outran its math. The captain marks two small crosses on his range card to remember that cheap heroism costs rare metal. Water tins arrive with the authority of sacrament. Each cup steadies a hand that will make a computation later when men with medals are not watching. Bread comes with rail dust on it and becomes part of accuracy. The enemy's last attempt at daylight is elegant in a way that earns respect. Smoke laid as lashes, not blankets. Assault guns speaking in careful, unfashionable bursts. Infantry that pause at the ditch because the ditch asked, not because fear did. It presses the web backward 3 plow lengths and would have made that a mile if patience had not learned its arithmetic. The captain spends his last surprise in Su-85 that had been sulking behind willows, leans and removes a philosophy at 900 meters. A 76, with its shield crooked on purpose, refuses to die to a coax because ugliness also saves lives. A Panzer backs out decently. Decency is the only mercy allowed. Dusk comes in low, and the air becomes medicinal. Katyusha's comb, not to kill but to smooth. Guns cool with clicks like small hail. Breeches are swabbed the way eyelids are closed in a quiet room. Tractors nose forward to fetch iron that can be taught to pretend tomorrow. Medics exchange cigarettes for names. A harmonica invents a better version of a tune no one loved. Farther back, a Studebaker with its work done coughs once and sleeps. The Pakfront folds like a cat curling, but keeps one eye. You ask, impatient for conclusion, whether nemesis has ended the book. It has only turned the page the way good prose does without tearing. The moving mind has learned scholarship, the still mind has learned hinge. The lesson ahead belongs to other nouns, river, town, wood, but the verbs will be the same: observe, place, mask, hold, strike, withdraw, return. In the low places, frost begins again, drawing lace no one will thank. The field keeps its receipts in tracks burned into clay, in char on shields, in the smell of wool that has known earth. Morning will ask its question as always. The web, polite and pitiless, is ready to answer with angles first and thunder only when necessary. Night lays a flat hand over the fields, and the wind loses its edge. Along the reverse slope, the web changes shape without changing mind. A living diagram erased and redrawn in the dark by hands that have memorized their own distances. A gun is lifted by tails like a stretcher and walk 3 furrows to where a thistle breaks the skyline just so. A decoy shield is set at an angle that flatters a careless optic. A lane of mines migrates the width of a stride because the captain, who sleeps standing when he sleeps at all, remembered how drivers think when smoke thins. Maskirovka is not the art of lying. It is the art of letting the enemy tell himself the wrong truth. Far back, new timber arrives with the smell of sawdust and intent. Fresh barrels, squared and oiled, wait like unlit candles. A rack of rockets draped in tarpaulin looks like a shed until it does not. Men step around these objects with a reverence they do not grant medals. In a shallow command pit, the map's skin has been scarred by pencil for so long that the paper drinks graphite like rain. Triangles have multiplied, each corner a gun, each line a promise, each shaded square a place where someone will be asked to learn patience the way a child learns letters. The opposing doctrine also ripens in the night. Pioneers stitch satchel charges to poles so that stone and wood can be persuaded without ceremony. Assault guns are refueled by hands that distrust haste. An 88 on a low carriage is walked to a mouth of a lane and made to kneel. A priest preparing to disagree with faith. Hummels and Westbys crouch behind plowed crests like cats that believe in pouncing only when arithmetic approves. Radios whisper in the clipped grammar of men who have learned consequence on call, on map, on time. Dawn comes brittle and clean, a blade slipped from a sheath. Visibility grows like a vow. The first gestures are modest, a box barrage landing with bureaucratic fairness. Smoke rising in planes exactly where it was drawn last night. Assault guns easing along hedges with the care of librarians replacing books. Infantry solve ditches with rope and nerve, refusing the old grandstanding for the new quiet competence. This is the most dangerous enemy, the one who has heard the lesson and intends to pass. The Pakfront does not seek to fail such students. It seeks to lengthen their exam until the clock wins. A 57 mm, tempered by yesterday's heat, speaks at 700 where it once preferred 800. The loader does not resent compromise. He counts the new interval allowed inside his teeth and adjusts. A ZIS-3 painted in last autumn's leaves remains silent while better targets parade, reserving itself for the one who will try to pass on the right-hand fringe where smoke is thinner and habit heavier. When that silhouette arrives, the gun fires once with a voice that sounds like certainty. Another gun answers from a ditch that yesterday held water and today holds intention. Crossfire is not spectacle. It is the sentence that ends arguments. The seam appears as it always does, in a place no briefing dignified, a meadow slightly darker where groundwater never gave up, a gap in saplings where a farmer once drove a cart, a bend in a fence line barely visible to men who do not live here. Pioneers test it with bayonets as if reading Braille. Grenadiers fold into the crease like breath. The captain spends 2 titles he was saving Su-85s that slip from behind willows to recite proof at range. Rifles delivered on plank seats like a promised answer carried in cupped hands. There is no charge, only a curve. No shout, only a placement. The seam learns humility without drama. The day's middle is an argument between professionals. German artillery praises economy, placing brackets instead of paragraphs. Soviet counter-battery replies in the same language, shaving seconds off corrections, marrying survey to intuition. Assault guns converse across hedges, each accusing the other of pride. Both survive by refusal. A Brummbär reduces a farmhouse to compliance and makes a lane. But the lane narrows in the next field where a single 45mm gun, resurrected from a ditch by men too stubborn to be modern, places a lucky, learned round into a sprocket at the exact height that turns momentum into memory. You don't cheer, you take note. The web is at its best when it takes notes. Sometime after noon, the ground itself asks for a pause. Heat makes powder smell of almonds and regret. Breaches need more cloths. The 57s write smaller figures on their range drums. A sapper brushes flies from a field phone as if they were bad ideas. A Studebaker nudges forward with tins of water that grant temporary genius to tired math. Cups find mouths and the hands that count breaths steady themselves again. Salvage trundles with chains that sound like old songs. A loader, who has not written a letter in months, wraps a firing pin in rag with the tenderness he used to reserve for verbs. The enemy tests a new synthesis that hedged. Mobile Pakfront, they learned yesterday. Arcs overlapping. Infantry screens that refuse to swagger. Panthers restraining their noses like proud dogs on short leashes. For 20 minutes, the field earns the name fair. Smoke is a chisel. Mortars are commas. Both sides hold their grammar together with will. Then chance joins craft. A liaison pilot, late and contrary, discovers an observer's nest by the shine on his kettle. A 17-pounder appears at the very edge of an ally's timetable and cuts a neat hole in doctrine. A single shell, thrown by a howitzer that would be considered elderly if it weren't so correct, slices a wire exactly between syllables. Fairness resigns. The web exhales and returns to its work. What the Pakfront was buying with all this restraint reveals itself in a gesture not grand, but decisive. A line of SUs and rifles tilts forward the short riposte promised since dawn. Not an exploitation, only a shove. He speaks in brief syllables into a copse where stubbornness has been living rent-free. Tracers stitch a low red seam across an exit the enemy thought private. A platoon of T-34s glides along a ditch like pike in shallow water and then stops. Content to be the wall others need. You expect pursuit. You receive poise. The forward guns revert to needles and pins. The captain folds his pencil like a knife and listens to the field for the one word it still owes him enough. By late afternoon, clouds lift their hems and the wind rotates. The assault, fatigued into decency, begins to back away with competence. This is when cruelty is easiest and therefore most expensive. The Pakfront does not squander it. A last volley nips at the second rank to teach prudence to the overconfident. A dead hull is dragged 3 meters to corrupt an angle for tomorrow. Miners reseed the right-hand fringe where smoke will drift in the morning if the wind keeps its promise. It is housekeeping, and housekeeping wins wars made of days. History grinds its wider gears in the near distance. East of here, a river line thickens into doctrine. West of here, a city with an unpronounceable name practices auroras in the night from depots struck by certainty. The Pakfront's dialect, born of necessity before Moscow, sharpened at Orel and Kursk, spoken fluently across Ukraine and Poland, is now part of every conversation at every crossing, in every copse, beneath every factory wall. The moving mind, everywhere, has been made to kneel to angles before it may stand and run. Even kings ask permission of triangles. Dusk comes broad-shouldered and gentle. Guns cool with small, approving clicks. Barrels are swabbed with cloth that turns the color of argument. Crews eat stews that taste of iron and patience. A medic writes 3 names on a card with pencil pressure that would imprint through steel. He slips it into a pocket he will check until sleep admits him. A chaplain's hand hesitates over a muttered ritual because he has learned that the real prayer is the discipline that makes tomorrow predictable. A harmonica pulls at a melody until it yields, and someone laughs without volume because laughter is a lane through a minefield when bodies cannot move. Night again, and the web folds like a cat's tail around its feet. Lanterns are shaded, wire is tested, minds are touched the way one touches a sleeping child, responsibility heavier than fear. The captain squares his range cards and packs them into the same case that has carried every day's geometry since winter. Farther back, trail lights wink under trees where T-34s and Su-85s breathe slowly. Their crews sleep on plank seats and dream in maps, the only honest luxury they have allowed themselves. To the west, a black column of smoke, today's ruined doctrine, leans away and thins. The ground accepts it with the indifference it reserves for weather. You wanted a myth. The steppe hands you a method. Nemesis here has no face. It wears angles, tape, spades, grease, triage, cups of water. The word wait spoken without apology. It forces speed to ask permission and makes bravery prove utility. It teaches men to love verbs that do not glamorize: observe, place, mask, fix, strike, bind, stop. When the Panzers come tomorrow, they will come correctly, because correctness is what the web has taught them. Some will return. Some will become grammar marks in fields that do not care about grammar. All will have learned that movement lives by the grace of those who understand stillness. The wind freshens, dew begins to knit its fine, unkind lace in the dips. A fox crosses a lane with the dignity of a survivor. In the pits, hands black with labor, and faith close breeches as if closing eyes. The last light is a coal in a canteen cup, pinched out by 2 fingers that have measured range and mercy both. The web rests without sleeping. Beyond the birches, engines clear throats far away, and the steppe turns its head to listen, as if the earth itself were the oldest gun, already laid on and merely waiting for the order that never needs to be shouted.